And Betty, thank you so much for joining me today on what saith the crooked nose. And if you didn't know, Cameron means crooked nose, and so that's where I get my the name. And we were talking a little bit offline, a little bit about a healing journey, and I'm certainly happy to talk about my own. But I'd love to hear a little bit about what you've seen and kind of where you've come to put you in a place where you are now at least thinking about a healing journey of yourself or of others.
Oh, absolutely. And thanks for asking that question. Well, I have seen a miraculous healing in my life, which was just so phenomenal that it made me, brought me to the realization of how wonderful would be if I could do that. It was my husband, and he was, to make a long story short, he was in the hospital, expected to die any moment. And he had liver damage. He
Mhm.
had his eyeballs were as yellow as a stripe down the center of the road, and he was put in the hospital in isolation because they didn't want him near anything, and there was nothing they could do about it, and they didn't know what caused it. His liver was 3/4 of the way damaged and beyond recovery, and I I had been working in self-development since I was 19 years old. And by then I was about 23 or whatnot. And the power of the mind and all different things that I had practiced in meditation, and I was very into the scientific end of things, and rather than a spiritual end, and vibrations and what vibrations can do for you. And I was working on, ever since I was a young child, I was working on a weight problem. I was always upset and fighting my weight. And that was my motivation to go into all this self-help stuff. And by the time my husband took ill with all this liver damage, um, I was doing a lot of meditation, and I was having connections and getting answers to my questions that were coming out of the blue and did not seem to make sense to me, but they actually did once they were interpreted correctly in the once I saw the right context to them. And my of course, regardless of what your religious feelings are, when somebody when you're in a crisis, you're going to pray just in case.
Now, the idea that there's no atheist in a foxhole, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I remember my dad died when I was 12 years old. And my mother had a really hard time with his loss and raising me and my brother.
Mm.
And I really missed him because I was very close to him as a young child. And here I had a 6 month old and a three year old, a 6 month old boy and 3 year old daughter. And I just became furious. I was praying and praying, and he was getting worse and worse. And they were going to fire me at my job because I was taking off to go to the hospital to see him, and I used all my sick leave. And they said, if you don't come to work, or if you have any more personal phone calls, and of course, doctors were calling me work, telling me that he's going to die at any minute. Why aren't you coming to see your husband? They thought I was forsaking him.
Right.
And I had two young children, and I didn't want to lose my job. It was my only income. So I was kind of between a rock and a hard place. And then finally, it got right down to the wire. He was going to die. And they called me up and says, he may not last long enough for you to get here to the hospital to see him. Well, I was at work, and that was my final personal phone call that they forced through to me. And of course, they decided they were going to fire me on the spot. And I broke down. I pretty much had a breakdown there. And rather than fire me, they put me on medical leave for having a mental breakdown, sent me home with the promise that I had to go see a psychiatrist as part of my medical leave that they put me on. And when I contacted that person, they said I had to see her that day. And I told her what my situation was. She said, well, you can see me later. You get to the hospital before your husband's gone. In the meantime, I was praying I always prayed in a meditative state. So I got in the meditative state, which was very difficult because I was so upset. And I screamed and I said, God, how dare you? I yelled out loud, God, how dare you take my children's father away? You took my dad away when I was only 12 years old, and I can remember him. But my 6-year-old son will never know his dad. And his 3-year-old daughter will barely know her father. And how could you take him from them? And finally, I cried myself out, got cleaned up, went to the hospital. And yeah, my husband, he was in pretty bad shape. And while I was sitting there and the doctor come in to talk to me, he had a clipboard with at least, I'd say 4 inches thick of papers on that clipboard. And so he lifts up the paper and he looks at the first paper and he goes, wait. And he looks down another couple papers and he looks down a couple more papers, grabs his phone, calls the lab, and he says, you need to do this blood test again because it's wrong. You need to, so they come up and they drew blood and they went down to do a blood test because, you know, he was so toxic that they were just waiting for him to kick off. And they come back with a blood test. It was like an emergency one they did right away. And they countered the doctor and said, no, the blood test is right. And the doctor says, no, that can't be right. And they said, absolutely, it is the right blood. We didn't mix anything up. That is the blood test. And the doctor looked up and his mouth dropped open and he said, he's getting better. He can't get better. He's beyond the point of return. The next day, he was sent home.
And how old were you at this point?
I was about 23.
Okay. And so you've been very secular and
20s.
scientifically minded up until this point. Is that right?
Well, yeah, but I was looking to solve my weight loss problem. I used to beat myself up by not being strong enough. And I was raised with a very, very strict mother that was going to have that. She had she didn't really have a hard life when you think of it, but in her opinion, she had a hard life. And so she was definitely a victim, and her daughter wasn't going to be a victim. So she tried to beat everything into me to do things and learn things perfectly. And perfectionism was what I grew up with. And of course, I could never do it right. Never. And the minute I got something right and had good results, she found another ways to point out where I could improve. So therefore, I still didn't do it right.
Always a shifting goalpost.
Only criticism.
Yeah.
So I grew up feeling that, by the time I was a teenager, all I wanted was to leave home because my life was going to start when I got away from home, because maybe I could make something of myself, because I was a good for nothing and I could do nothing right and everything was wrong. And I just skating by. My brother was a delinquent. And so I finally, I met my husband. I was 19 before I left home, and but I left home anyway. And he ended up moving with me because I found a job. I had graduated from a computer school, and I found a job for the government as a computer operator.
And so just to make sure that I can keep kind of the timeline straight, because I'm really interested in your story about how old were you when you first started? And it sounds like, and if I'm wrong, please correct me, but it sounds like you started your spiritual journey as a means to cope with your weight situation. And
Yes.
and how old were you at that point?
I was probably in my teens. I was raised a Christian, and I went to Sunday school. My mother made sure I went to Sunday school and all that. But I did not resonate with what the Sunday school teachers were teaching.
Well, how can
Uh,
you? They're not even
I,
teaching things that they believe most often than not.
I just couldn't resonate with it. And then I felt like I was a bad person because I didn't believe
Yep,
all these Jesus
yep,
teachings. So now I'm bad there, and I'm going to
yep.
go to hell.
Right, all this guilt and then more guilt and more guilt, and you're not
More
perfect,
guilt,
so
guilt,
more
guilt.
guilt, and then
By the
you start
time,
gaining weight, and then that's even more evidence of not being perfect, which more
oh
guilt
well,
there.
see, I wanted to be a ballerina as a child. A lot of children have that dream,
Mhm.
and I, of course, my mother said that we didn't have the money for me to have dancing lessons and that type of thing. So I started copying off the TV, our little wee black and white TV. Anytime there was some dancing on there, I tried to mimic it. And finally, she put me in dancing school when I was 12 years old, which is kind of a late start compared to other children taking dancing lessons. But she put me into dancing school because I was so clumsy. She thought, well, maybe I wouldn't hurt myself. You're so clumsy, maybe that'll teach you something because you're never going to be a dancer. So, due to our financial situation and my age of being 12, my dancing teacher took pity on us. My mother worked as a receptionist in her dancing school to help pay for my lessons. And during the summer and on weekends, I would work in the dancing school to earn my lessons. And I became a student teacher for the 3 to 5 year olds because
Nice.
anybody can
Give it.
do the simple things a 3 to 5 year old would do. And of course, in the summer, I lived with my dancing teacher. And of course, my dancing teacher put me on a strict diet and said, you'll never be a dancer because you eat too much and you're not active enough and you don't. So I went from my mother doing it to my dancing teacher doing it. So that's all I grew up with.
And
And
then when your husband got better, especially so acutely, like so quickly, what did you attribute it to? Because the doctors apparently were befuddled.
yeah, they contacted us several times after that, begging him to come in so they could do a biopsy and find out how his liver recovered, so that maybe they could help other people.
And did you
Um,
guys do that?
he said, no, nobody's going to touch me. It
I can't hate
works
him for that.
fine.
Yeah.
But I when several years before, just several years before, I met somebody where I at work who turned me on to Silva mind control. Now, Silva mind control was a course that she said that'll help you lose weight. You're unhappy with yourself because it will teach you how to control your urges and improve and whatnot. And it was pretty scientific from a spiritual standpoint because it used brainwave frequencies and all of that type of stuff that is now coming more into play with uh, different brainwave frequencies and our ability to go within and to reach higher levels of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So I had that under my belt. So I was about 20 when that happened. So so my journey probably started with that because I went to the Silva mind control thing, and they had an orientation thing you could go to for free. Well, we didn't have the money to join, and I wanted to join, but what we were told, if you really feel a calling to join, go ahead and join and put down a small deposit. So we put down $10 each. Well, my husband didn't want to have any parts of it, but he said, you're not going without me being there because he didn't want me to do anything without him being there. So I said, well, I'm going to do it. And so he said, well, I'll do it just to keep you out of trouble. So we put down $10 each deposit, as they said, because they said the money will manifest if if you go ahead and commit.
If
I
it's
didn't
right for
think that
you,
would
then
happen.
yeah.
I was very, very detailed and very detail oriented, and took a lot of business courses. I knew how to balance checkbooks to the penny, and I would even waste 2 or 3 days balancing a checkbook if it was 2 cents off. For 2 pennies, I was going to have that thing balanced. And
Perfectionism.
yeah, oh, definitely. I still have that tendency, and I'm learning to deal with that and get away from that and be perfectly imperfect.
Yeah.
But I 3 weeks later was time for the first class, and they said if you come to the first class and you can't pay the remainder of what is due, then you will we'll give you your deposit back. So I go to the first class, and I know I don't have the amount in my checkbook, but I go and I well, actually we did write out a predated check for the full balance at the when we put down the deposit, and they were going to give us our check back. And I called the bank because I was afraid maybe the check went through and they didn't, and they're not going to give it back to me. And there was money in there. And I said, no, wait. Now I balance my checkbook to the penny every single month. There can't be money in there. There's no money in there. I mean, we went paycheck to paycheck, and back then you could buy spaghetti dinners for 25 cents that have the spaghetti and the sauce and stuff, and I could buy 50 cents worth of hamburger and make our dinner because that's all we had for to eat. So we were really, really down to the edge, and the money wasn't there, but that when I called the bank, it was there. So, well, we went through silver mind control.
Nice. And so was this before or after your husband got sick?
This was before he got sick. And I was afraid to take silver mind control because our graduation on silver mind control was that we were going to be given the names and ages of 3 people. We were going to be able to go into our right brain frequency, he called going into level. And we were going to be able to sense any physical abnormalities in that person and actually send healing vibrations to them. And if we could not do that upon graduation, we would get our money back. So I figured, well, this is going to be free because there's no way in the world I'm going to be able to do that. Well, I failed. I was able to sense things in all 3 of the test subjects, and although I couldn't label it, I had the right area of the body and I had the right feelings of what was going on with them. So it actually happened. We were able to sense and actually send healing vibrations. That's kind of where my interest in healing occurred, because I didn't think it was possible. I did believe there were people in the world that could heal. But I thought it was something special about them, something that made them different, that they were built differently and they had a gift that other people don't have, and it couldn't be learned. But there it was, being learned by everybody in our class, was able to get through that class and be able to pass the graduation.
That's awesome. So when I got trained as a healer, and I got trained as a healer through Ed Stracher, right, who also trained Peter. And in fact, Peter writes in the inside track there about the time that he healed his foot when he broke it. And well, Ed started talking. He was talking about healing. At first, I thought he was a crazy person. Like, dude, get out of here! Come on, man! Like you're making stuff up. But up until this point, I'd been following a lot of Sadhguru, and he's an Indian mystic who then led me to Peter. Like, absolutely. Just the idea of life is about experience. Don't just sit there in your head. Go out and experience life, because that experience will inform you far more than just logically deducing something when you have no idea how the world's going to physically react to it. And as I was thinking, this guy is out of his mind, I heard a whisper in my right ear, like legit, audible. I feel like if I had a recorder going on, I would have captured it. But it was Sadhguru's voice saying life is about experience. And then I had to follow up with what he
Mhm,
would normally say, isn't it? Because he left it for me to then take it forward and actually move action with it.
mhm,
And it was phenomenal. In fact, within like 2 hours, like 2 hours of us of him showing us how to heal, he said, "Hey, who wants to try it?" I was like, "Well, I mean, I'm kind of nervous, but yeah, of course, like how could I not say yes to that?" And he put me in a breakout room and somebody joined. They didn't even turn on their camera. So I couldn't even visually see if they were being compliant. And so that was
mhm,
super awkward for me. And so my very first time, don't know, I mean, I don't necessarily know what I'm doing, but I can feel that I know what I'm doing. And she sounded like she was being compliant. Well, she said that she was there for libido problems. She had libido problems. And as I was taking her through my method, and I only spent like 5 minutes with her, it wasn't very long at all. She said as I was taking her through, she'd actually feel something flicking her ovaries as if the energy was like kickstarting to start flowing back through them again.
mhm,
And it was like, well, okay, well, I mean, what better way to convince me that I'm capable of something than to actually have me do it and to put me on the
mhm,
spot and to have me do it. And so there's a few questions as well that I like to ask my guests that come on, and
mhm.
you've shared a pretty interesting story, and this is a very open-ended question. But I'm curious if you have the ability to define spirituality, how would you define spirituality in the eyes of Betty Raymond?
How would I define spirituality?
For you, your personal
Um,
walk on spirituality.
Spirituality to me is a higher intelligence, um, all that there is, and that here in our physical form, because I feel that we are spiritual bodies in living in a physical home, and I feel that that there is infinite intelligence, which is a spirituality to me. That we can get answers from. We don't have to know the answer. We can ask, and you shall be given. Seek, and you shall find. And a lot of it with my interest in science and scientific things, I think that science is proving that, so that science and spirituality is coming closer and closer. And I feel that, as a matter of fact, my husband, my late husband, he did pass away years later when my son and daughter were. My son was 16, 17,
Mm,
and he was just about realizing his dream. He was an audiophile. He loved music and speakers. And he hooked up with a famous man that made high end speakers. This man actually helped develop um, some of the first satellites. He helped develop a lot of the bug detection devices in the White House.
mm,
This guy was a genius. He liked speakers, and my husband was going to take over his speaker company because he didn't have any marketing or business sense. So he wasn't making a go of it, although made a fantastic product. And visiting and talking with this man, he was talking about experiments through things that he was doing where they were working on killing on curing cancer with vibration,
mhm.
because he said that you've got a cancer cell that vibrates in a certain way, and a healthy cell vibrates in a certain way. So if you could take a vibration and apply it to the cancerous cells so that it vibrated at the same vibrational level of the healthy cell, it was no longer cancerous. And that they were having success with that. But I, it was something in the scientific um, realm of this gentleman that I had no access to. But it made sense to me, just like the levels of consciousness and the vibrations of the theta and the alpha and the so
Well,
it
and even more than that, like, right? If you are experiencing sadness and you just put a smile on your face,
mhm,
well, you start to release endorphins in your body. You start to change your physiology.
yeah,
So as you change your body posture, and if I put my arms in the air like I'm a winner. I mean, there's a huge TED talk about just doing that for like 2 minutes. Will
mhm,
decrease cortisol, increase testosterone, allow you to deal with stress a lot better, allow you to think under pressure. And that's just 2 minutes of like of posing, let alone putting a vibration into, you know, the body. And so that, I mean, that makes so much sense. And then when we realize, you know, like Peter Sage talks about, that an atom is 99.999999% empty space. Well, and then we start reading about, you know, what mystics talk about. For instance, the Tao Te Ching, if you're familiar with that, there's a part in there where it talks about how we shape clay, you know, to form a jar, but it's the empty space that holds what we want. We hammer wood into a house, but it's the inner space where we live, right? Being is what we work with, but non-being is what we use. And when we tap into that, I like your idea of a higher intelligence. And I've been doing a lot of playing with the idea of the busting loose from the money game. Scheinfeld, was it Robert? Was that his name? I can't remember. But you know, he talks about this idea of the infinite self, and people come into your, you know, your circle of influence, into your radar with a script handed down from your infinite self. And if you've ever done any sort of sales training will help you understand that whatever's going on in your mind, well, your client's going to have that going on as an objection. So if you feel that you know, you don't really trust in what you're saying, don't really trust the product, well, then you're going to come off as untrustworthy. And that's what your client is going to be picking up. If you don't believe in yourself, well, they're not going to believe in you, no matter how good the product is, no matter if it's perfect for them. If you don't believe in yourself, well, they're going to pick that up and they're not going to believe. So we end up manifesting that which is in our head, as Peter Sage says, right? The outer world follows the inner world. And so when you think of Jesus, right? I'm not much into religion, but very spiritual. And when you think of Jesus, when you know, oh, I can't remember the word, but the religious folk back in the day, you know, cornered him and said, "Hey, Jesus, bro, what's the what is the most important commandment?" Because that was that was against the law to say that one commandment was better than another, and a great way to put somebody to death. And so instead of him invoking the letter of the law and listing all 10 commandments, he invoked the spirit of the law. And the spirit of the law was, you know, love thy God above all else and love your neighbor as yourself. And if you think of that from busting loose from the money game, and think of love thy God, he didn't say love her God or love his God, love thy God. And if thy God, if you are the infinite, right, the ocean in a drop, because your soul is the image that is formed in the image of God, not the flesh, but the soul, well, then thy God is your soul. And if you love your soul, well, then as we're having a human experience in this human game, well, then we're going to love the scripts handed down for others playing in our story. And if we love the scripts being handed down, a lot of times those scripts are going to have areas where we lack, areas where we're projecting from a place of scarcity. If we can wrap our arms around and embrace where we feel most concerned, where we feel most uncomfortable, and because we now realize it's coming from our God self, well, now we're loving our neighbor as ourself, and that's kind of that unity consciousness. And so I've been doing a lot of thought into that. And I don't know, what are your thoughts on that idea, what I just said?
Well, you know, the problem I have with my Sunday school teachings, or you know, and even people today that are friends that are very Christian and praying to Jesus, and was the part of the Bible where Jesus says that as he does, we can do too. Well, why are we praying him for him to solve our problems if we can do what he does? And if I'm a child of God, regardless of how you define God, and Jesus is a child of God, that makes him my brother. So why am I going to my brother and ask him to save me?
When you've got the exact same power
Yeah,
instilled in you. Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
that's well, and the thing is because coming back to the Tao Te Ching, right? And you know, religion will make a lot more sense if you look at it through the eyes of the Book of the Way. And you know, it says when the great Tao is lost, goodness is found. When goodness is lost, morality is found. When morality is lost, ritual is found. And ritual is the husk of true faith, the beginning of chaos. And what is religion but ritual? We, ritualistically will stand up and say and repeat the exact same things that other people say. What is ritual? Mother Mary, whatever from Grace. Yeah, I'm not Catholic, so I don't know any of the,
Yeah.
any of the things there. But what's more ritualistic than that? What's more ritualistic than the sacrament? The exact same thing, taking a piece of bread, drinking some water with it. And that's all we have, which
Mhm.
if it's a husk of true faith, and in faith, will, where you'll find your happiness and your power. Well, no wonder so many Catholics and no wonder so many Mormons here where I am in Utah. No wonder why so many ritualistic religious folk are so miserable, because they're a husk of what they could be.
And they're fighting each other because their way is the only right way.
Because they're fighting
And
themselves.
yeah, and I started to look at into different religions and saw so many similarities between them. There are just so many similarities that I came to the, and of course, I got into deep meditation, wondering, well, why are there so many different religions, and why, why do they all claim that their way is the only right way? And I came to the conclusion, through a feeling that religion is man's attempt to define the undefinable or
I
describe the undescribable.
I don't know that I necessarily disagree with that,
Mm-hmm.
but I think those that run religions
Mm-hmm.
use it in the way that Napoleon Bonaparte said when he said that religion is there so the poor don't murder the rich. And religion is there to tell you what to do. I mean, think about all the misery that you've gone through, all the guilt, because you were told to feel that way. And if you weren't told to feel that way, would you have felt that way? Well, probably not. And would you have likely been closer to finding out your infinite self if you were not told how to limit yourself? Well, probably. And
Yeah.
Peter Sage talks about the example of give or take 144,000 people working on the Manhattan Project, and none of them knew, because those at the top don't share and disseminate information except
Right,
for those
right.
at the top, and then those
Mm-hmm.
above, below them. And we see this in secret societies where there's like 33 grades to Masons. And listening to some of these people that come from the secret societies and actually start sharing this information is like, oh, well, that actually makes a whole lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense how they're able to kind of
Mm-hmm.
compartmentalize that information. And it also makes a lot of sense that if we truly are limitless, well, and everything we see is an illusion. Well, it seems like the vast majority of people are coming from a place of scarcity and a place of lack. And if we create and manifest that which was going on in our head, well, of course we have to have a world that's probably not very awesome, where there's a lot of scarcity, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of fear, because that's what's going on in people's heads. And Sadhguru talked about if you want to be happy, just be happy. And at
Mm-hmm.
first I thought he was like, dude, come on. Yeah, okay. Says an
Yeah.
Indian mystic who grew up with that. Yeah,
Yeah.
just be happy, bro. And then I really spent some time in deep meditation. It's like, I get it now. I get it now. Going through Ed Strater stuff and healing my own soul. I get it now. Just be happy. That makes sense. And I've manifested abundance in my own life just by focusing on the good feeling of abundance, even when it wasn't there, and I was rewarded by my faith. And that's what true faith is. True faith is having that feeling, knowing that as you're working towards your ultimate good in sync with your God self, embracing your neighbor as yourself and feeling good about it and just sharing love, well, you'll be rewarded by your faith, because love is the strongest force there is.
Yeah, absolutely. And but in this physical form, physical reality, you do have contrast. You can't have everything's two-sided. That there's nothing that doesn't have two sides to it. A coin, heads or tails. So I've come to the conclusion that when you find yourself on the tail end, you need to flip the coin.
So
Just flip
yeah,
the coin, because you have a choice. You can be tails, or you can be heads. They both exist. They both exist at the same time. And your choice is, which do you want to be?
Yeah,
Which do you want to identify with?
I like that. And you know, I think I already know the answer to this question, but would you say that you are a letter of the law or a spirit of the law kind of person?
Oh, well, I have learned to be a spirit of the law. I used to be a letter of the law for many, many years. And the laws didn't make sense to me.
Mm,
They seemed, some of the laws that just did not make sense. They limited our rights, took away our freedoms. And if we want to be stupid and not wear a helmet on a motorcycle and we crash and die, that's our own damn fault. And we shouldn't be demanding other people have to live a certain way or follow a certain law for their own protection. I know it different areas of as a parent, of course, we do have to lay down the law to our children to keep them safe. But at some point, we reach a level of maturity where certain laws are restricting our freedoms. And that was pointed out to me. I worked for 6 years with Discover Credit Card Company as a customer service representative. And that clarified that really was the last thing that made me more spiritual or the spirit of the law, because I was still being a perfectionist, and I still do have those tendencies. I followed my training as a customer service representative very literally to the point. And we go around 5 or 6 months, and we go through all these trainings. And keep in mind, when I talk to a customer, and of course they threw me up into escalations, which meant when anybody got really, really upset and the representative couldn't appease them, and they say they want to talk to a supervisor, it came to me. So I only got the bad calls. but the reason I'm bringing this up is we go 6 months, I'd follow the training, letter of the law, doing perfectly, thought I was doing the best job. They'd have a meeting and they would change the law. And we had to act completely different than we were acting the day before because the rules changed.
mm-hmm.
So the letter of the law changes. It constantly changes. And sometimes it changes to the opposite of what it was. So, that really that didn't resonate with me. What is the letter of the law? Because it can be wrong, because as time goes by, the law changes.
Well, and as I've looked at that question as well, as far as letter of the law or spirit of the law, I can think of a lot of times where following the letter of the law will violate the spirit of the law, but I don't think that there's any time following the spirit of the law that you'll violate the letter of the law too, and it's such an egregious way where you feel it and you just like,
Yes,
oh man,
I
this is
agree.
wrong. You'll certainly, like, you might break the rules in the sense that the rules say you shouldn't be able to do this, but you still basically did for the customer or did for whatever that rule was intended for in the exact same manner that the rule would have had you do in the first place. You just went around in a different way, like taking a different path to get to, an endpoint. And that's where I think it's a lot more safe to fall within the spirit of the law. And I think spirituality has a hard time following rules for the sake of rules, which is why religion is the husk of true faith, because it's just rules for the sake of rules, not rules to make you better. Rules to be like, hey, did you follow this rule? Because if you did, then you're a good person. It's like, wait, wouldn't I be able to feel that I'm a good person? Like, why would I have to make myself feel miserable to go through and jump through a bunch of hoops to then say, well, at least I'm a good person? Like, that just doesn't sit well with me. And then I guess now moving forward, you talked about some of your spirituality in your early 20s and some of the power you did with mind control. I'm curious, how do you harness the power of spirituality in your life now?
I'm working with heart math,
Mm,
and I'm raising my vibrations. And I still find that I get really down at sometimes. I get on the tail end of that coin.
yeah.
See, my last 5 years I've been dealing with uh, well, my first husband got the flu and died within 4 days, just like that. Right when he was ready to realize his dream, he had just obtained a high end audio store, which he dreamed his whole life that he would have, and he got this horrendous flu and it became toxic, and he was gone. And again, like when I was younger, I screamed to God. I said, how could you take him away? He was finally going to realize the dream. The thing he dreamed about his whole life was going to be for him. I didn't even think of myself. And you took him away, and he never got a chance to realize that. And and a voice outside of myself, I know it wasn't me talking, came to me and said, you asked for your children to have a father. Your children are grown now. He's mine now. Very, very informative. You know,
Mm.
I gave him to you for your children. He's mine now. And that voice was just so, there was no emotion in it. It was just fact. And I heard that voice one other time, was when my father died. I was 12 years old. My father had a heart blockage. He was only 33 years old. And they told him back then they couldn't do bypasses or anything. They didn't know anything about arterial blockage
Mm-hmm.
back in those days. All they did was give blood thinners to the point and let until the person finally got totally blocked and died.
Yeah.
Of course, my mother kept it from the children. So when my father came home from the hospital, I thought he was better, and I thought he was fine. And he said, and I had, we had these connections with each other, and I got seriously ill and was in the hospital shortly before, right after he came out of the hospital, and nobody could figure out why. And I had a high fever, and eventually it broke, and they sent me home, still not knowing why I got sick, so deathly sick. And I was very close to my father. I was born on his birthday, and I think maybe that somewhere that had an effect on me,
Well,
physically, without
things of
any
the
knowledge.
spirit, things of the spirit, and things that feed off the
Yeah.
spirit, right? We
Mhm.
often will play around with ideas of demons. You know, I've got all my skeletons in the
Mhm.
closet. You know, I'm just battling my demons.
Mhm.
Well, you know, however you describe a demon, you know, effectively energy that's not yours, that's making things harder for no other reason to make it harder, and draining your soul, right? And
Mhm.
so, you know, things that do that to somebody who's very close to you, that shares a connection with you, especially a spiritual
Yeah.
connection, well, then you can make yourself quite vulnerable to the exact same thing, and then it can start making you
Yeah.
sick. Because when
Yeah.
the there's a really interesting line in a movie. It's kind of a throwaway line, even, but it's in a Transformers movie, Age of Extinction, with Mark Wahlberg. And there's got Optimus Prime there. He's like this truck that's all rusted out, and Mark Wahlberg pulls his missile out, and Optimus Prime comes back to life. And Mark Wahlberg's talking to him and say, "Hey, man, you're lucky that this didn't hit your energy source, because you would have been done." And so Optimus said, "Well, hey, we actually call that a spark. That's what houses our memories and our life force." Well, Mark Wahlberg, without skipping a beat, says, "Well, we call that a soul." And so many people will watch that movie and be like, "Yeah, of course, we call that a soul," without
Mhm.
actually realizing and thinking about, well, what are the implications of that, right? And
Mhm.
if saying that we have a soul and it's our life force isn't just a throwaway line, and it's an absolute truth, well, what happens when we start getting our soul drained by tuning into constant negative news that
Mhm.
will, you know, that'll make us sad, make us angsty, make us, you know, worried for no other reason than to be worried, eating terrible food, which often, when you consume terrible thoughts, what follows is terrible food.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
there's really not much difference in the
Mhm.
consumption there. And,
Yeah.
you know, having the ability to kind of step out of that, you know, that's another thing that the Tao, you know, I really love that Peter coincides with, is that, you know, that which resists persists. You know, the Tao talks about give evil nothing to resist, and it will go away on its own. It doesn't mean that it's not there. It just means that you can step out of the way. It's like,
Mhm.
that's
Yeah,
some hot stuff right there. And then it was recently pointed out to me, and it blew my mind. I hadn't really thought about it, but Jesus straight up said, I am the way. Well, the Tao Te Ching is the book of the way. And I don't know of anyone more Taoist than, if not Lao Tzu, then definitely Jesus. He definitely flowed with the Tao and harmonized, right? He was somebody who we would count as the, arguably the most holy being ever. And yet, where did you find him? You found him in the dregs, with the dregs
yeah,
of society.
yeah,
Those are the
yeah.
people that he loved, the people who needed
Mhm,
his help, people who needed his love, the people who were hurting. And he went and shared that love with them,
mhm.
because the Tao is not concerned with just one or the other. The Tao
Yeah,
is part of both, and understanding that. And there's another chapter in there that says, what is a good man but a bad man's teacher? What is a bad man but a good man's job? Right? Those who don't understand this will be lost, no matter how intelligent they are. And that's the point of life. If we don't like what we see, well, is there a way in which we can affect it using love, driving with love and truth, um, seeking inwardly first to make sure that we aren't just trying to fix an inward problem being projected outwardly,
mhm.
but is there something that we can then affect by, right, changing ourselves in order to change the world?
Yeah, yeah. So I ended up coming out of the hospital about the same time he came out of the hospital. It was my first year of junior high, and I was a week late, so I had to learn everything when everybody else knew their way around. And I get into my class, and the teacher tells me that somebody in the hall wants to talk to me, and I thought, why would I be called out of class? This is ridiculous. And that voice again said, with certainty, no feeling, just truth, just sure. It just was. Your dad died. And I walk out into the hall, and it was my next door neighbor telling me that my dad died.
Hmm.
And of course, being being so young, I panicked because my mother was a stay-at-home mother. She didn't know how to support us. I thought our lives were over. Our whole family's lives were over. There's nobody to take care of us. The man was, took care of the family.
Yeah.
And I panicked, and I was crying and screaming in my room alone, again saying, how could he leave us? Who's going to take care of us? My life is over. And that same voice came, and I call it truth because there's no way to refute it. It is fact, and there's no emotion. It's just fact.
Mhm.
And the voice came again to me, and it's like a father's voice, and it said, "When have I ever not taken care of you?"
Mm. So what
And
was the feeling? So you said that the voice itself didn't seem to have much inflection, not much feeling towards it, but what
it
was
was
the
a
feeling you
father's
felt inside?
voice, and it was speaking fact. It was speaking the truth.
And did you get any sense of like any feeling inside resonating with that, or was it just something that you just accepted and that's just how it was?
I had to accept it because that's what was. It was so certain that there was no going against it. It was that's the way it is.
Hmm.
And of course, well, of course it eased my mind. Of course, when have I always I've always taken care of you, so there I knew I was always going to be taken care of. So that of course alleviated my fear right then and my panic. I only had that happen one time before. My son, born perfectly healthy, great little baby, and not much of a problem, but he was less than a month old, and my husband was still recovering from his liver damage. It took him a year actually to come back to some normal semblance of physical abilities. And so he was home, but he wasn't doing much to recover. And I was feeling sorry for myself. And I ran out to the just to get out of the house. I said, "You watch the baby. I'm getting out." And I went out, and I had nowhere to go, so I just went out to a late night. It was late, um, a late opened, well, it was Walgreens drugstore, and they were open real late. And I just wandered through there just to relieve my stress. And that voice came to me, says, "You need to go home, take care of your boy." And I said, "No, let him take care of him." I argued with the voice, said, "You need to go home and take care of your son." And I said, "My husband's there, let him do it for once." And the voice came to me, "Go home now." And it startled me. And I got in the car and I zipped right home. I was only a mile away. And I go in to see my son. He was face down in his little crib. He was blue and not breathing. I never had any experience with mouth to mouth, but I thought, well, I better give it a try. He was like one of these little cloth dolls, you know,
Yeah.
no, nothing. He was just a limp. And I puffed some short breaths into him, and nothing. Finally, he took a breath, and he took another breath, and I was just so relieved. And then he quit breathing again, and then I puffed some more breaths into him, and he started breathing, but it was very labored and noisy. We rushed him into emergency room, and evidently he had a bout of sudden infant death syndrome. And because they found nothing wrong with him, nothing, absolutely nothing physically wrong with him. And I said, "Well, did he maybe suffocate because he had turned over and his face was down?" And they said, "No, as strong as he was, and with his health, he would have been able to lift his head or change his position." And yeah, I spent several months not sleeping at night, waking up every 15 minutes and checking on him, because they told me there's really nothing you can do about it other than watch them closely and that they'll outgrow it. But yeah, so I know there's something out there, a higher intelligence that communicated with me. It's just, it's definitely true. And
That's awesome.
so,
Well, and I'm sure that's bizarre for some people to hear
yeah,
and try to wrap their mind around, but like, oh well, right? That's your truth, and it doesn't change your life whether they believe you or not. And that's one thing that I love about spirituality, is that it's going to be different for everyone. Everyone has a different soul signature. Everyone's going to feel things differently. When I take people through healing sessions, people feel things differently. I intuit a lot of what I should say. And so I have a pretty good idea, about 50% of what I'm going to say, but I let the rest just kind of be intuited and guide me. And I've had people tell me, "Oh my God, man, this part, that you went through was amazing for me." It's like, well, awesome. I felt very powerfully that I should take you through that. And you mentioned bypasses. I actually had a lady from my EMF cohort from Arizona reach out to me, heart problems, had multiple heart attacks, said that she's had a bypass that didn't work. And it came to me because she's having chest pain and was scared and felt like now she's driving on the road and hitting the rumble strip and like, oh my God, I better do something. And since working with me, her initially her energy level on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1's like deeply lethargic and 10 is just like living the life, she was at a 2. She was at a 2 out of 10. And then her last session with me is going to be on Tuesday. But last time that I met with her new baseline, just waking up, her new baseline is now a 9 out of 10. Chest pains are gone. Life feels great. Yeah. Well, and that's what's amazing, is that, again, if I tell somebody, "Hey man, I'm a healer," that's, "Dude, shut up, sit down, you're a healer," right? Well, that doesn't change my life whether they believe me or not, right? What's important is that if somebody trusts themselves to be vulnerable enough to be like, "Hey, I need help." Well, you know what? I can help you in much the same way that mind control, even if you don't ask. But the problem is if you don't ask, you're not going to appreciate it. In the same way that somebody gives you $1,000, you don't appreciate it, you're going to go blow it, and then you're going to find yourself broke again. So if you get healing and you don't appreciate it, well, you're going to find yourself sick again, because you're going to engage in the exact same things that you were doing that made you sick in the first place, that drained your soul in the first place. And so having that, that gratitude and that awareness of like, "Hey, I would like some help. Can you help me?" really opens somebody up. And is it possible to heal somebody when they don't have that? Sure. A little bit more difficult. And again, they'll likely ruin their results. But there's a lot of nuance to spirituality, and I love that as well. You know, I've been a philosophy nerd for most of my life, even though I really have identified with a lot of science. I thought that philosophy was there to make sure that science didn't go too far, right? Science is, you know, much like, you know, Lucifer's the bringer of light. Science in many ways is going to push the envelope because it's what it does. Hey, where can we get more knowledge?
Right.
Where can we get no more knowledge? Doesn't matter
Mhm.
what the morality is, right? Where can we get more knowledge? Where can we get more knowledge? And you know, science can go the bad way when it comes to, say, Nazi camps. But religion can do the same thing because it's not actual
Mhm.
spirituality. It's a husk of true faith, and they can have the, you know, the Spanish Inquisition, right, or the Salem witch trials, and you know, being able to check that part of us that needs to demand, if the frame of the world doesn't meet what I expect it to, then I better burn it down. You know, right? The more that we
Yeah.
can check that and be like, hey, this absolute certainty I have in this belief,
Mhm.
what makes me so certain?
Mhm.
And just see where that goes, and allowing ourselves to poke holes where we find um the need to be that you know, that Secret Service agent that's jumping out in front of a bullet to protect a president just to protect our own feelings. If our feelings are hurt, then it absolutely has to be false. And the
Mhm.
second that feeling arises, it's good to start questioning, hey, what caused that? Why do I feel that? Why do I have a knee-jerk reaction to go ahead and react in that manner? And
Mhm.
really, that's why, if you read the Bible, and in fact, there's even a book about, you know, Jesus is the question. But if you read the Bible, Jesus asks questions. He gives very, very, very few direct answers. And in the same way that you said, like, you know, why? How could you take my husband? Or rather, you know, what's going to happen, you know,
Mhm.
and you know, when your father died, right, my life is over. Yeah, you were posed with the question, right, when have
Mhm.
I not taken care of you? Didn't give you an answer, right? You
No.
pose a question to direct your mind and be like, oh, well, I guess you're right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you know, Betty, this has been a fantastic conversation. I feel like you and I could talk for hours and hours. um
Absolutely.
and I love this exploration of spirituality with people, how they harness it in their lives. For now, I'm mainly just interviewing people who are part of Peter Sage's elite mentorship forum, whether they're trainers or just nerds like I am. And you know, because I'm not an elite mentorship trainer. I just love the material. I love that it can help me resonate and help me add value to the rest, to myself for first, my son second, and then the rest of the world. Um,
Mhm.
and having these conversations helps me because it helps me explore my own spirituality, because I can actually kind of lay it out and then investigate it. Then also hear you say things. It's like, oh, interesting. Hadn't thought of that. And I felt feelings of certainty the way that you spoke of a voice, but there's
Mhm.
very few times I've ever heard an audible voice except when it came to working with Ed Stracher. You know, even
Mhm.
with Peter Sage, in my heart, I
Mhm.
felt that he was me going backwards in time, saying, you can be me, you can be me. It's like, I want to be you, bro. And it's not like I want to be Peter Sage. I want to be Joshua Cameron's version,
Mhm.
right? Of who I approximate Peter Sage to be now, right? Because when I reach that, he's going to be Peter Sage of who he is then.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but yeah, that's awesome. It's funny how many similarities we have, but also just how different we all are.
Mhm. Well, I am an EMT. I
Oh,
am
are
a
you?
trainer. I haven't started yet. I'm just getting going, and I'm struggling with my whole life with that self-esteem problem. Even when I was in my teens, I even had suicidal thoughts, not because I wanted to kill myself, because I thought I had no value and I didn't deserve to be alive because I was so stupid and such a screw up.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I actually did feel that way for a while. As a matter of fact, when I got a little older, it made me ponder, why did I feel that way? I got into a deep meditation, and that thought came to my head without any restrictions and what would come to me.
Mhm.
And I got an answer that completely obliterated any feelings in that regard. the answer was because you need to kill the person that you are now and become the person you should be.
Interesting. Interesting. That's so I think that one thing that may benefit you as far as EMT and maybe where to start and how to start. Christina Valentine, goes by Tina. She is starting a cohort in April. And I know that she's welcoming anyone who wants to be a part of that, but maybe reach out to her and see if, maybe you could help out as a community manager, or maybe you could just find out more information, just to figure out like, hey, what did she do to get herself from point A to point B to point C to actually like getting it off the ground and going, and network with people that are doing what you want to be doing. And I bet with as happy and amazing as she is, she would be a wonderful resource for one, and be more than happy to actually talk to you.
Well, I'm getting really excited about actually starting my own cohorts and starting. I'm definitely technically challenged, so I have to learn a lot about the internet and how to get out there and sign people up and all these different places to reach people, Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn, which I know nothing about. But while I don't know nothing about now, I'm learning, but I've got a lot to learn yet in the technical aspect of it. But I'm really excited about it. But I always had that niggling thought that I grew up with. It takes a while to get rid of that stuff. And it comes and haunts me every so often. Who are you to become a trainer? You're not good enough. And then it did occur to me, of course, I'm still doing my meditations, that you don't have to be as good as people that you have out there that you're looking towards. So like other people in my cohort that are already, in EMF 16, that are already running trainings and whatnot, that I should not be comparing myself with them, because no matter where you are in life, no matter where, there are always people that need your help, that are at a lower level in life. So maybe I'm not so high on the scale of becoming a trainer, but they're out there, the people that I can help, and I can help because other people may be a little too high to understand them, because I'm so close to the low self-esteem and stuff that I could deal with them more directly than somebody that's higher up trying to bring them out of their why me mentality.
Well, I really like the idea of where we are now is really where we can serve the best, because now is where we have power. We don't have power in the past, we don't have power in the future.
Right.
Where we are now is where we can best serve. And I like that. And I actually think that's a wonderful place to probably end the conversation. And I think that next time we chat, I'd love to hear, and you'll probably be having your cohort. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. But this has been an incredible conversation. You've had an incredible life. What a heck of a journey. And I really appreciate you being so personal and sharing some things from your heart and your soul.
Well, it sure was nice talking to you. And again, I do want to maybe schedule a private call with you regarding the healing that you're doing.
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
More about that as well.
Yeah, I'd love that. In fact, if you want, we can maybe chat about that if you have time a little bit after the podcast. But yeah,
sure, absolutely.
Perfect. Well, this has been amazing. And to all those out there, I hope you've enjoyed watching this as much as I've enjoyed having the conversation.
And anybody that might want to contact me, they can contact me in a Facebook group that I just opened up, and with my new identity, Ageless Magical Living.
Perfect. And I'll make sure and add that to the description of the video as well, so that way people can find you a little easier. Sound good?
Super.
Awesome.